I've been doing challenge videos on my channel for a while now, and recently they seem to be doing quite well. While I do love Miitopia a lot and plan on doing a special challenge video on it eventually, today I'd like to return to my challenge video roots. The first challenge I ever did was seeing how few pauses it would take for me to beat the Switch version of Link's Awakening. In that video, I said that if enough people wanted it, I would do the same challenge on the original version. While no one has expressed interest in that, I decided that that's what I'm going to do anyway. Hello Luiginoids, this is LuigiXRules doing another Zelda challenge video. In this video, we will see how many pauses it took for me to beat the Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX on the Game Boy Color. This game is notorious for how many times you need to pause and switch items because the sword is one that you need to move around. Of course, previous Zelda games didn't let you switch the sword out at all and left you with only one item slot, so I don't really see what the big deal is. Anyway, I'm counting pauses as any time you press plus, minus, or all buttons at once to pull up a menu. This means we'll try to minimize the amount of times we open our map screen, change items, and even save. To get around the saving issue, and because I don't own a Game Boy Color, I'm playing on the Game Boy and Nintendo Switch Online app to use restore points as saving. I'm also allowing rewinding just to make things a little easier and because dying may cause unnecessary pauses to occur. Finally, before we begin, I would highly recommend watching my amateur video on the Switch version, as I will be referencing it from time to time and even spoiling the final pause count. Okay, there's a lot to go over, so let's just get started already. Right off the bat, we can see the biggest difference between the Switch and original versions of the game. The sword and shield are equipable items in the original. This means that anytime we need to equip something like bombs, we may need to override our sword, meaning that we won't have it for a while and may need to make an extra pause to re-equip it. Thankfully, unlike with the Switch version, the items get automatically added to empty slots, so we don't have to waste pauses equipping the sword and shield. Keep this in mind for later. Our first major roadblock comes in the forest, where... Okay, come on dude, this video's long enough, we don't need you interrupting me every 10 seconds. Anyway, just like in the Switch version, this raccoon blocks our path until we obtain the magic powder. So, you would think that, just like in said Switch version, we need to pause to equip the magic powder. However, we actually need to pause even earlier, as the mushroom needed to obtain said powder is actually an equipable item for some reason, and the witch refuses to give you the powder unless you use the mushroom as an equipped item. When we do give her the mushroom, the magic powder appears in the same slot that the mushroom was in, so at least we don't have to do another pause to equip that. Still, pause number 1 came even earlier this time around. This is not a good start. You might have wondered why I replaced the sword with the mushroom instead of the shield. This is because there are no enemies that absolutely need the sword to be taken out before the next required pause, and in fact, there are some enemies in the Tail Cave that require the shield, so it's actually optimal to go with shield and magic powder for a bit. We rock these until we get Rock's Feather, which is needed to cross some gaps to get to the Nightmare Key and the boss. So, pause number 2 happens to equip it. This is the perfect opportunity to re-equip the sword as well. Good thing too, as the mid-boss and boss require the sword to be taken down. Just like in the Switch version, pauses lighten up for a bit. However, unlike the Switch version, it doesn't last for long. While there aren't any pauses on the way to Bottle Grotto, once we get there, we immediately need to use some magic powder to light these torches. I would have replaced the sword with the magic powder, but immediately after this we need to hit the switch and the magic powder can't hit it. This is bad, as we shortly need to jump over these gaps with Rock's Feather, meaning another pause is required to equip that. Then, we need to light these torches to scare off these ghosts, and once again, a mid-boss requires us to bring the sword instead of the magic powder. So, a third pause is required to equip the magic powder again. I wish this was the end of the pauses, but just like with the sword and the shield, the power bracelet is actually an equipable item in the original version. So, we need to pause to equip it in order to progress through the dungeon, along with Rock's Feather so we can grab the Nightmare Key. Finally, to get to the boss, we need both the power bracelet and the sword, so that's another pause to equip the sword. That's 5 pauses in a dungeon that required 0 in the remake. No wonder people complain so much about how much you need to pause. Now that we've finished the Bottle Grotto and have unlocked the power bracelet, we can explore a lot more of Koholint Island. The first thing we need to do is complete part of the trading side quest so that we can access the castle. Sadly, before we actually enter the castle, we need to pause and equip Rock's Feather to cross this gap. During the same pause, we get to see the debut of the bombs, as they are needed to obtain some of the golden leaves. Sadly, they alone don't let us obtain all of the leaves, so we need to pause again to re-equip the sword and power bracelet. After we've obtained all of the leaves, we need to pause again to equip the shovel and dig up the slime key. Then we need to pause to equip Rock's Feather to actually get to the third dungeon. We couldn't have both the shovel and Rock's Feather at the same time because the grass that leads to the slime key respawns immediately and neither the shovel nor Rock's Feather are capable of destroying it. While this last pause was necessary in the remake, we're still leagues ahead of it in terms of overall pauses, so don't get your hopes up that the pause count might not be too bad. Once we get into the key cavern, we can see that some enemies need to be defeated in order to progress. This means pause number 12 to equip the bombs happens, as they can defeat these enemies and blow up some walls, as well as being required for the mid-boss. I also decided to equip the sword, because our next pause would have required 2 items being switched out anyway. See, the item of this dungeon is the Pegasus Boots, which is one of the equipable items due to button limitations. We need both the Pegasus Boots and the sword in order to grab this key, so we would have needed the sword on the next pause anyway. This is why I equipped the sword when I equipped the bombs. Of course, another pause is still required to equip the Pegasus Boots and grab said key. Then, we need to grab this key, which requires clearing this gap. While Rock's Feather can clear 2 wide gaps on its own, the Pegasus Boots are required to cross this 3 wide one. So we pause again to equip Rock's Feather. Finally, once we're close to the boss, we need to defeat these guys. We can't do that with just Rock's Feather and the Pegasus Boots, so yet another pause needs to be made to equip the sword again. Thankfully, that's it for the pauses, as the boss just so happens to require the Pegasus Boots and the sword, the combination of items we happen to have right now. So we can finally be done with the Key Cavern. Our objective now is to obtain the Angler Key from the Yarna Desert in the southeast region of Koholin. To do that, we first need to wake up the Walrus. The only way to do that is to talk to Marin and get her to sing for him. And sadly, these rocks block us from reaching Marin, so we need to pause to equip the Power Bracelet. After we get the key, we can put it in the keyhole and make our way to the dungeon, which has us go through this part of the cave that requires the Pegasus Boots. We can't just have the Power Bracelet and the Pegasus Boots at the same time, as we needed the sword to kill the boss blocking the Angler Key. So that's another pause to equip the Pegasus Boots, as well as Rock's Feather. You'll see why we need that very shortly. Once we get to the dungeon, we can see that we need to defeat these guys so that we can get through these rooms and eventually jump this 3 wide gap. This would require a pause to equip the shield and possibly some attacking item. However, we can actually cross this gap from the side with a very precise jump with Rock's Feather. This is why we needed to equip it when we equipped the Pegasus Boots. The rest of this dungeon goes by pretty smoothly, as Rock's Feather helps us cross a lot of gaps that seem like it shouldn't, and the dungeon item is the unequipable flippers. While this is kind of a trash dungeon item normally, the fact that we don't have to equip it in order to use it makes it perfect for this challenge. Sadly though, this dungeon doesn't go by pause free. In order to get to the flippers in the first place, we need to fight this mid-boss. Since neither the Pegasus Boots nor Rock's Feather can damage it, a pause is required to equip the sword. After that, we can get the flippers, get to the boss, and finish the dungeon without any additional pauses. After finishing the Angler's Tunnel, we need to escort this ghost to her old house and to her grave. Of course, since this requires us to navigate around Koholin, this requires the Power Bracelet, so we have to pause to equip it. From there, it's a pretty straight shot to the 5th dungeon, Catfishs M. Right away, in order to collect the first key, we need to defeat these enemies and jump these gaps. This requires both the sword and Rock's Feather. Since we needed the Power Bracelet to be equipped before entering the dungeon, this means we need to pause to get the correct combination of items. After some exploring, we encounter this skeleton dude that requires both the sword and bombs to defeat. So we add a pause to make that happen. Sadly, this combination of items doesn't help with traversal at all, so whenever we come across gaps like this one, we need to pause to equip Rock's Feather. Also unfortunate is the fact that we need to fight the skeleton guy 4 times, most of which are separated by gaps we need to jump over. This leads to this dungeon having a bunch of pauses, which I will show you right now. After defeating the skeleton guy for the final time, we obtained the hookshot. As you might expect, this item is indeed required to progress through the dungeon and grab the nightmare key. So here's yet another pause. Although we have to fight some enemies immediately afterwards, the hookshot is actually rather powerful in this game and can defeat most normal enemies. So at least we don't need to equip the sword as well. Until the boss, that is, as it doesn't take damage from the hookshot. We still need the hookshot to make it damageable though, so here's another pause to equip the sword as well as the hookshot. We can't just have these two equipped the whole time, as there are still some gaps to jump with Rock's Feather. With that final pause out of the way, we're finally done with this pause-infested dungeon. In the end, the Catfishs M took 8 pauses to beat. For reference's sake, at this point, the Switch remake would have only had 5 pauses total. We've still got a lot of pauses to go, don't we? Now that we're done with that, we need to obtain the face key and get to the face shrine. To get the face key, we need to navigate to this shrine, which requires us going through this mazish area with these rocks that require the power bracelet. So that's a pause to equip that. Just like in the remake, it seems like this area wants me to buy the bow, but we can defeat this boss with just the sword. Although we do get stunned a lot without Rock's Feather. Nothing else gets in our way until this gap, which seems to want us to use the hookshot to cross. However, the far more versatile Rock's Feather can also cross this gap just fine, so we equip that instead, along with the bombs to help us get through the next dungeon. Once we enter the 6th dungeon, we need to hit this switch while being past these barriers. This, along with the spawnable wall, is why we needed to equip bombs. And we needed Rock's Feather instead of the hookshot so that we could clear the subsequent gaps. First, though, we need to defeat these slimes, and while it's annoying, it is possible. Actually, there's quite a few enemies that we need to defeat using the bombs, and in order to make sure I had enough, I had to abuse the rewind feature quite a bit. Shortly thereafter, we encounter the upgraded power bracelet, the item of the dungeon. Once again, since it's the dungeon item, we should have to use it sometime within the dungeon. And lo and behold, in the same room there are these elephant statues that we need our new power bracelet to lift. So there's a pause to equip that. We override Rock's Feather because we still need to blow up this wall and hit a couple of switches. After some more keys, some annoying wizrobes, and the mid-boss, we find ourselves faced with these small gaps. Sadly, these gaps are just wide enough to require us to use Rock's Feather. This time we replace the bombs, as we still need the power bracelet. After a while, we encounter these Pole's Voices, which we could normally defeat with the power bracelet and some jars. However, since there aren't enough jars in this room to defeat all of the Pole's Voices, our only method of defeating all of them is with bombs. Plus, the following room has these enemies that absolutely require bombs, so we pause to equip them as well as the hookshot. The hookshot is needed to cross this gap and get to the nightmare key. However, the chest is blocked off by jars, so we need to pause again to equip the power bracelet. Finally, in order to get to the boss room, we need Rock's Feather to cross these gaps. We can't just equip the power bracelet and Rock's Feather because we need to defeat these wizrobes again, and the boss requires bombs to be defeated anyway. So here's one final pause to equip Rock's Feather. Yet again, that took way more pauses than the Switch version. Luckily, we don't have too many more dungeons to suffer through. Before we get to the 7th dungeon, we've got a lot of things to do. First, we need to grab the frog song to wake up the rooster underneath the town weather vane. To do that, we first need to grab the ocarina. Technically, we could have grabbed this as soon as we obtained the Pegasus boots, but there are a ton of enemies in the way, so we just need the Pegasus boots and the sword, right? Well, sadly, the bed that takes us to this area is blocked off by rocks, so we need the power bracelet as well. So somehow we need to use the Pegasus boots, sword, and power bracelet, but we only have 2 item slots. This would require several pauses to equip the power bracelet, unequip it, and re-equip it to get in and out. However, there is a reason I've waited until this long before grabbing the ocarina. With the hearts we've obtained from the bosses, as well as some pieces of heart, and with some help from Tracy's revival medicine, we actually have enough hearts to collect the ocarina without defeating any of the enemies, meaning we don't have to equip the sword. Now, we do still need to pause once to equip the power bracelet and Pegasus boots, but that's 2 pauses we shaved off right there. We're still far from the next dungeon, however. We now need to actually obtain the frog song. Normally that would require us to hookshot across this gap and go around the area in a specific order, crossing this gap in the process. However, we can actually use Rock's Feather to cross both of these gaps, once again proving the superiority of Rock's Feather. In the end, I don't think it actually mattered, as it's still a pause to equip Rock's Feather or the hookshot, but whatever. With that, we can obtain the frog song and head back to town. To wake up the rooster, we need to equip the frog song and play it for him, so that's another pause to equip that. Now that the rooster's woken up, we can use it as the replacement Rock's Feather for a while. Of course, we still need the power bracelet to pick it up, so not much has really changed. The next pause occurs on this mountain path, near these crystals we can't break without the sword. So we need to pause in order to equip it. It might seem like we need the Pegasus boots to clear this, but we can actually just fly around the tent crystal things. It made me wonder if we could just jump around them with Rock's Feather, but it seems like this jump is just barely not possible. Oh well. Once on the mountain proper, we need to grab the bird key, which thankfully doesn't require any pauses. However, in order to get to the next dungeon, we need to cross this gap that requires the hookshot, even though we can fly now, but whatever. So that's yet another pause to cross the gap. Finally, we've made it to the 7th dungeon, the Eagle's Tower. The premise of the Eagle's Tower is that we need to knock down these 4 pillars so we can lower the boss arena. To do this, we must use the power bracelet to lift this ball and throw it at them. Good thing we already have it equipped. And since we have the hookshot equipped as well, we can defeat most of the enemies without hassle, including the 2 mini-bosses. Although the one with all the flies is rather difficult, as we need to hit all of them in one swoop, so expert timing with the hookshot is required. Most of the dungeon can actually be completed in this way. However, to reach the 4th pillar, we need to bomb these walls. Since I couldn't find a way around this, here's the first pause of the dungeon added to the counter. Immediately after, we need to cross this gap and pick up the previously thrown ball so we can hit the pillar. These actions both require items other than the bomb, so another pause is required to bring back the power bracelet. After this fourth pillar is hit, it's a straight shot to the boss. While the sword is preferable for fighting bosses, we still needed the hookshot after hitting all of the pillars to cross this gap. Luckily, the hookshot is, for some reason, able to deal damage to this boss. It's difficult, however, because we can't combat its winds while shooting the hookshot, and after we're blown off, its health seems to reset. This means that the boss turns into a gamble, hoping you're on the right side when it decides to blow wind at you so you can cancel out the attack. Although, now that I think about it, I never tried just hanging on to the ladder. In any case, with enough luck, the evil eagle goes down, and we finish this dungeon in only 2 pauses. Wait a second. That's how many pauses the Switch remake took. That can't be right. I'll have to look into this later. The final dungeon is on the west side of the mountain. So, after saving Marin, we travel there through this secret tunnel underneath this patch of grass. Even though the power bracelet can normally lift up grass, it can't when the grass is covering a staircase for some reason, so we need to pause to equip the sword. Our next obstacle surfaces with this cave that we have to blow up. So we can just equip bombs when we equip the sword, right? Well, after cutting the aforementioned grass, we immediately need to hookshot across this gap, so we need to leave it on until we come across this cave. So that's another pause to equip the bombs. Inside the cave, we see that we need the mirror shield, which I totally forgot to mention we picked up inside the Eagle's Tower because, let's face it, it's a contender for the worst dungeon item in any Zelda game, so we just equip that with the bombs. Finally, blocking the entrance to this dungeon is this turtle thing? Anyway, we need to play the frog song to awaken and kill it, so we need to pause again. We use this pause to equip the sword, as unlike the Switch version, we don't need bombs to defeat it, and cannot, even if we wanted to. Now we're inside Turtle Rock, the final dungeon in the game! Right away, we can see some pits that we may have to jump across. Hopefully we can find a way past that. We can go to the left right away and collect everything there for now, but eventually we are forced to either go up or right. Since both of these directions require jumping over lava, we need to pause and equip Rock's Feather. At the same time, we need to equip the bombs. See, past this pit, we need to collect a bunch of keys so we can fight this boss and collect the dungeon item. One of these keys requires defeating these guys with bombs, and we need to hit this switch hidden behind a bumble wall to be able to access the item. This is why we need the bombs now. However, this is not enough. We still need one more key, which we can obtain by shooting this statue in the eye. With the bow. I knew this was coming up, but I still hadn't actually bought the bow because it was so darn expensive. But it seems we now have no choice. Thankfully, the game provides a warp out of the dungeon partway through, so we can go back to town and buy the bow pretty easily. Of course, there is no way to get from Turtle Rock to the shop and back without the power bracelet, so we would need to equip it. If we had the bow beforehand, we wouldn't be in this predicament, but just stick with me here. For now, we need to pause to equip the power bracelet, and nothing. Remember way back at the beginning when I said that new items are automatically added to vacant item slots? Well, that wasn't just for the sword, shield, and magic powder. If we leave one of our item slots vacant and then buy the bow, it will automatically be assigned to said empty slot. So we can equip the bow without having to pause. And luckily, we can access the spot we need the bow for in Turtle Rock without needing to jump over any pits, so we don't have to worry about pausing again to equip Rock's Feather. At least with the bow. After we grab the key from hitting the statue, we still need to navigate to the room with the mid-boss, which requires both Rock's Feather and the hookshot to cross this gap in particular. Once we get to the boss, we encounter a unique problem. It seems to be completely immune to the hookshot. Well, that's not good. I guess we need to pause again to equip the sword. Once again, we leave the other item slot vacant, as when we defeat the boss, we are granted the magic rod, which goes into our empty slot. This is why it didn't matter that we waited until now to buy the bow. After hitting the eye switch, we would still need to navigate to the mid-boss room, which, as previously mentioned, requires both the hookshot and Rock's Feather. Because we need Rock's Feather both before and after the hookshot, we can't equip either with the one pause required to equip the bow, so we need to pause again afterward. Hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, let me know in the comments, and I'll try to explain it better in a pinned comment. Anyway, while equipping the magic rod like this is cool, the fact is we can't really do much with it without Rock's Feather. I mean, we can grab this key, but that doesn't require the sword we already have, so we still can't avoid another pause to equip Rock's Feather. Then, right before the Nightmare Key, we have this boss that is immune to the magic rod. So that's another pause for that. Immediately after we grab the Nightmare Key, we need to equip Rock's Feather again to get across these gaps. We need to leave the magic rod on so we can get past this icy room and fight the boss. To summarize, that's one pause to fight the second mid-boss and another to re-equip Rock's Feather. After this, we are surprisingly done with this dungeon. As, like previously said, we just need the magic rod to defeat the boss of Turtle Rock. With that, we have conquered all 8 dungeons and are ready to save the Windfish once and for all. To get to the Big Egg, we need to navigate Koholint a bit. If you haven't already guessed, that means we once again need to pause to equip the Power Bracelet, as well as the Ballad of the Windfish, which I picked up when I grabbed the bow. After playing all of the instruments at the same time somehow, we can navigate the egg because I had completed the trading side quest and could access the book that told me the path. Now it's time to fight the final boss. Right off the bat, we can see that we need some magic powder to fight the first phase. You'll see that I have the boomerang, which did require an extra pause, but I never actually ended up using it during this fight, so it doesn't matter anyway. In any case, we need to pause to equip the magic powder for the first phase, and the sword for the next couple of phases that have us knock back balls, hit a tail, and spin attack this guy. When the shadowy figure turns into this ball with a trail, neither the sword nor the magic powder can damage it, so we need to pause to equip something that can damage it. Obviously. Anyway, we specifically need the bow, as it can also damage the phase after this one. I also decided to equip Rock's Feather so that we can jump over his arms, and because it doesn't really matter anyway. Also, apparently the boomerang can only one-shot this arms phase. I thought it could one-shot the entire fight, and that's why I went out of my way to grab it. Good thing we have restore points! Anyway, after we hit the arms phase a couple of times with our bow, the shadowy figure is finally defeated, and that means the run has been completed! So, how many pauses does it take to beat Link's Awakening DX? From my testing, this takes 54 pauses. For some quick stats, the dungeon with the most pauses was actually the Catfishs mod, 8, even above the 7 that Turtle Rock took. The least amount of pauses was a tie between Tail Cave and Angler's Tunnel. As for the amount of times each item was equipped via a pause, Rock's Feather takes first place with 18 times, followed by the sword at 14 and the Power Bracelet at 11. The item equipped the least amount of times was the Magic Rod, at a technical 0 because it was equipped outside of a pause. And finally, the original version of Link's Awakening took exactly 3 times as many pauses as the Switch version did. Isn't it crazy how that lined up? Seems perfect, doesn't it? Well, let's go ahead and ruin it, shall we? In case you don't remember, I said I'd look into why the Switch and Game Boy versions took the same amount of pauses to complete Eagle's Tower. As it turns out, I erroneously assumed you needed Rock's Feather to beat Eagle's Tower in the Switch version. All that's needed are the Power Bracelet, bombs, and the hookshot. Since one of these is not equipable in the Switch version, we only need 2 item slots to get through the dungeon, and thus would only need a maximum of 1 pause. When I went back to the Switch version, that was indeed the case, meaning I have shaved off a pause in the Switch version, bringing the total down from 18 to 17. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was a lot of fun getting to see how everything was different in the original version of Link's Awakening compared to the Switch remake. Remember to leave a like, subscribe if you have not, ring the bell if you feel like it, and comment down below what challenge you would like me to take on in the future. I already have an idea for the next challenge. It's going to be on a game that has brought me a lot of success previously. Until next time, Luiginoids, goodbye!